Thank you for tuning in and welcome to ParaDivas. This is Marie Samuels, your hostess with the ghostess. And joining me as always is the hostess with the mostess, Marianne Donnelly. How are you doing tonight, Marianne?
Good. How about you, Marie?
I'm always doing good. I love doing the show. I love talking to you.
Awesome.
And I'm really excited for tonight's show.
Excellent, excellent.
Tonight, we have a guest that is going to blow your minds. She'll be joining us here in about 15 minutes. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the queen of the paranormal, will be with us. So you definitely want to stay tuned. She is, like I said, the queen of the paranormal. She's published over 65 books, all paranormal based. She has her own publishing company, full-time career in the paranormal. So I'm very, very much looking forward to speaking with her.
Sounds like a plan.
A plan and a half. I am just off the charts excited for tonight's guest.
Would never have guessed that. I was thinking you were sounding a little too depressed there, Marie. Gotta step it up a bit.
Yeah, no, I am stoked. But before we get to Rosemary, we left last month's show. We were covering the top 10 most famous female ghosts, and we did the first 5 of the list.
Yes, 10 through 6.
Yeah, 10 through 6. So now we get to finish the list, and we're going to do 5. Yes, the top 5 most famous female ghosts according to higgypop.com. So I'll go ahead and start it off with number 5, and that was the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. The ghost of Raynham Hall in Norfolk is believed to be Lady Dorothy Townsend, the sister of Robert Walpole. It was rumored that her husband suspected her of having an affair and locked her away in a remote corner of the house until her death many years later. And then they have a photograph where they believe they've captured her image. And this is one of the most well-known apparition photographs in the paranormal field. You might not recognize it being described as a brown lady, but if you saw the picture, you'd recognize it right off the bat. It's the specter coming down the staircase. And so, yeah, she's number 5 on the list, and it doesn't sound like the last few years of her life were very pleasant, and I could understand why she would be haunting the building.
Yeah, it's pretty sad that that would happen to anyone, but unfortunately it did.
I'm noticing a pattern with our top 10 female ghosts. They're all being killed by their husbands.
I don't know what that's about. Gee.
I know, right?
Should we be concerned?
Creepy. I'm starting to wonder, right? Like,
I don't know. Maybe they might be a little more afraid of us, though, at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point. You have a very good point.
All right. Are you ready to move on to number 4?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Number 4 is the Little Girl of 30 East Drive. And this one comes to us from the UK. It's actually 30 East Drive in Pontefract, and it's said to be the most haunted house in all of the UK. It's the most famously haunted by a 16th century monk known as Black Monk of Pontefract. And it's believed that the monk assaulted and murdered a young girl. What a monk, right? But he was hanged for his crimes, and then he was thrown down a well and left for dead. It is said that the well is right directly underneath 30 East Drive. And the house also has another famous ghost. It's a young girl named Emma, and she is said to be the ghost of one of that monk's victims. And her spirit is said to be less violent than the Black Monk, of course. And she's often described as being friendly, though mischievous, like any young girl should be, right? So that is number 4.
Right. Well, and it sounds like he was only convicted of one murder, but there may have been others.
He had others, yes. Yes, other victims. Not the monk that I think of when I think of monks. You know, I generally think of like Gregor Mendel and his little pea plants, you know. Don't normally think of, you know, murderous tendencies.
No, that's what's so interesting about it. I mean, I guess there's always a bad seed in every group.
Every field, yeah.
There's always that bad seed. All right, so number 3 on the list is the Hotel del Coronado. And this is on my side of the country, which is in California. It's said to be haunted by the ghost of a young woman named Kate Morgan. She checked into the beachside hotel for Thanksgiving in 1892, but never left. Hotel staff say that she was waiting for a man to join her, but after 5 days alone, she took her own life. Since her death, guests and staff at the hotel have reported plenty of paranormal activity, mostly focused around the room Kate stayed on the 3rd floor. Guests have experienced flickering lights, a television that turns itself on and off, breezes coming from nowhere, inexplicable scents and sounds, items moving on their own accord, doors that randomly open and close, abrupt changes in the room temperature, and unexplained footsteps and voices. So, poor Kate Morgan, her gentleman friend never showed up, and that was enough to push her to suicide. And now she roams the Hotel del Coronado, in California.
And it doesn't seem like she does much of anything there, does it? There's a whole bunch of things that she's got going on there, so she's quite busy apparently.
Yep, this might be my next location.
Yes.
To go check out.
Yes.
Because like you said, there seems to be a lot of paranormal activity going on there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right. So then number 2 on the list. Number 2, Lady Mary Berkeley. This one here is the resident ghost at Chillingham Castle. She is said to have lived in the castle with her husband, and unlike the last one who didn't show up, this one ran off with her sister. So her husband, he ran off with her sister, and she then died of a broken heart in a room that they know as the Gray Apartment. And there is a painting of her in the room that guests have claimed to see her actually come out of. And other visitors to the castle say they've heard her gray dress rustling through the halls. So, Lady Mary Berkeley, poor girl. Her husband left her for her sister. Dastardly.
What is wrong with these men?
I don't know. That's why we have a show for all women.
Right? Exactly. I mean, if they're not the killers, then they're not showing up and running off with other women.
Our poor ghostly women. I'm telling you.
I know. Well, I say every one of these women have a right to their hauntings. And so now we're on to number 1. The number 1 most famous female ghost is Anne Boleyn. Millions of tourists flock to London every year to uncover its history, and one of the city's most busiest and most famous attractions is the Tower of London, which is regarded as one of the most haunted buildings in London, with a history of over 900 years of torture and execution. The most notable spook visitors to the historic castle hope to spot is that of Anne Boleyn, the wife of King Henry VIII. She was beheaded in 1536, and her headless body has been seen walking throughout the building ever since, often near the place of her execution.
I want to see the headless
we
Anne
have
Boleyn.
another heading, right? And you know what? It doesn't say why she was beheaded.
What?
But
wasn't it because she couldn't bear him a son?
Is that what it was?
I want to say that is. I know she wasn't bearing him a son, and then she tried to manipulate the royal family and all that. And I think I think that's why she was beheaded. We'll have to look into that a little more intently, but I'm pretty sure that's what was happening.
Well, that's not her fault. I mean, cut her some slack. Don't cut off her head.
Well, then she became really mischievous and started really trying to, manipulate everything that was going on everywhere. So they just weren't happy with her.
I suppose. I don't know if it warrants a decapitation, but in the 1500s, it was a different time.
It was, but I know it was. She wasn't bearing a son, and I'm pretty sure she was manipulating the political standpoint of the family, and definitely was her downfall.
That's another sad story. They were all pretty much sad stories.
Pretty much. And usually it's one of those really tragic events or really super sad event that does tend to cause some hauntings. So it is not surprising that these ladies are the most well known.
All right, well, we got through the list of the 10 most famous female ghosts. And now we're going to go ahead and get Rosemary on the line with us. And this is going to be a heck of a show, so stay tuned with us. Okay, now enough with the suspense. We finally have Rosemary Ellen Guiley with us here, the queen of the paranormal. She's published over 65 books on the paranormal, covered probably thousands of cases at this point. So here's a huge warm welcome to Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Thank you so much for being on ParaDivas tonight.
Marie and Marianne, it's an absolute delight to be with you. I've been looking forward to this show.
And we are just stoked to have you. You are the queen of the paranormal, and like I was saying off air, you're my muse. I want to eventually take your spot.
You're going to try to knock her off?
You're probably a lot younger than I am, so you've got very good odds of that.
Oh, that's funny. So I think the best place to start is at the beginning. And then that being said, what got you into the paranormal initially, Rosemary?
I think I was born into it, literally. I've been a writer since my earliest memory. To me, I came out of the womb writing. It was that kind of a life plan. And from an early age, I was fascinated by the mysteries. I loved, I was a voracious reader very early in life, in grade school. And I like science fiction, horror, the paranormal. I was fascinated by astronomy. And as a voracious reader, I was on a search for knowledge from a very young age. And these interests have stuck with me throughout my entire life. When I trained as a journalist, I graduated with a degree in journalism from college. And I worked in the news media covering a lot of different topics. In 1983, I left those jobs and became self-employed. And there were a lot of directions I could have gone in as an author because of my journalism background. But what I really wanted to do was pursue the topics that had been of personal interest to me throughout my life. And so my personal interest became my professional life. And it's been very rewarding to me, never a dull day. I've been at it for over 30 years, and I can still say I'm on a rocket burn because there's always something new to explore.
And that kind of is the beauty of the field. You never run out of places to go check out and people having claims, and it's just an endless, bountiful field.
It is, and There are some fields that get oversaturated from time to time because they become hugely popular, and we've certainly seen that happen in the ghost hunting field. It happened in angels back in the 90s, but these topics never really go away or go completely out of fashion. They just sort of recycle, and new information starts coming to light, a new audience starts coming into the field, and we researchers continue our exploration. And I think the cutting edge today is from the perspective of consciousness, that we have to stop looking at these myriads of phenomena that we encounter that we call the unexplained. We have to stop looking at them as external events that have nothing to do with us. They have everything to do with us, and our consciousness is deeply intermingled and intertwined with what we are experiencing and how we are experiencing it, and then, of course, then how we integrate those experiences as well. So the researcher today really has to be a true Renaissance man or woman that is knowledgeable in a variety of fields. And as I'm sure you've seen in the past, there has been a tendency of researchers to ignore other fields. In fact, several decades ago, I've been in ufology for a long time, if you tried to imply that there were paranormal links and connections to ufology, you could be laughed out of a room. It just wasn't under consideration. It had nothing to do with UFOs. And today we know that's much different. All of these things are intertwined and they overlap. And they engage with the human being on different levels of consciousness. So the researcher really needs to understand these perspectives, and it's fine to specialize in one or two fields, but to be truly good researchers, we need to have at least working knowledge of these overlaps in other fields as well.
Right. Yeah, that makes complete sense. So I would say, I'm mostly into the afterlife and angels, demons, but like you said, it is all connected. UFOs, cryptids, it's all under the paranormal umbrella. And like you said, you could specialize in one thing or just pinpoint one section of the paranormal, but you really should have at least your toe in with the other aspects. For example, Eric Altman is a cryptozoologist, and for the most part, he's chasing Bigfoot, but he is well versed in hauntings and other paranormal activities. So UFO sightings, and the UFO sightings and the Bigfoot, those are starting to come. The theories are starting to come a lot together. I think I'm correct in that, yeah?
Well, yes, and this is information. These are data points that have been lying around for a long time. And many researchers in cryptozoology, again, like the ufologists from decades ago, did not want to consider them. And as we know, there are many researchers in the Sasquatch field who are convinced that we're dealing with a flesh and blood creature and nothing else, nothing that has a paraphysical nature to it. And yet, increasingly, the evidence is pointing in other directions. This is evidence that has been, it's been, like I said, it's been laying around for a long time. But now it's increasingly coming to light as more researchers are willing to consider it and, do some dot connecting. And I think we're going to see more of this. Next month, I'm a publisher as well as an author and researcher, and I have a book coming out that I'm very excited about called Chasing the Elusive Pennsylvania Bigfoot. A cryptid, and the subtitle is A Cryptid from Another Reality. And the author is Paul G. Johnson, who spent decades in painstaking field research in Pennsylvania, which is one of the big active Bigfoot states. Mm-hmm. And he's also has a scientific background. And in the book, he presents a very good discussion of, is Bigfoot part of some quantum reality? And these are things that need to be examined more and more in the field. And I'm very happy to see more Bigfoot researchers at least willing to give the topic some due, even if they're still swayed in the other direction. They are not shutting it out altogether.
Right. Yeah, they are starting to open their mind a little bit more to it, I think. I've always thought that Bigfoot being an interdimensional creature made the most sense to me.
It certainly made the most sense to me, and right from the get-go. And I'll tell you, from the beginning of my my full-time career, I left salaried employment in 1983. And the deeper I got into research of all of these fields, the interdimensional explanation made more and more sense, whether it's Bigfoot, dogmen, shadow people, aliens and extraterrestrials. And by the way, I think a lot of what we call extraterrestrials are interdimensionals. They're from parallel dimensions very close to Earth, not necessarily other planets. It made the most sense. How else could you explain the paraphysical phenomena that are associated with our experiences?
Right. And also, how does it, it explains why we don't ever find a Bigfoot. We've never found a body of a Bigfoot. We've never captured one alive. They're able to wiggle in between dimensions. That's how they're being elusive, and we're not finding the corpses.
And so many other pieces of evidence too, like sudden appearance and disappearance, footsteps that start and stop,
yes,
without any evidence of where they came from, like they dropped out of the sky. Mm-hmm. Instant teleportation. I've seen so many eyewitness encounter cases where they experience this instant movement of the being, that first it's here and then suddenly it's there, and they do not see or hear it walk or make sounds. It's just suddenly in one location and then it's in another location. And the disappearances, including right before people's eyes, and these sorts of phenomena cut across the board of all of our mystery encounters, whether it's ufology, cryptozoology, paranormal, or even mystical experience. And they can't be ignored. We cannot endlessly explain them away as, somebody was mistaken, they didn't get their facts right, they had too much beer that night, whatever. We come up with the craziest ways to dismiss the credibility of eyewitnesses. And that's, to me, one of the biggest crimes that the media and researchers can perpetrate on the people who are providing the best evidence for what's out there.
Yeah, perfectly spoken. There's perfect. That was just awesome. And another thing with the Bigfoot is that there's a lot of UFO sightings that seem to occur in the same area as a Bigfoot sighting.
It's a very interesting connection, and one that we don't find to the same degree in other mysterious entities, like dogmen, for example. Dogmen are not automatically associated with UFO appearances. And yet we find this connection over and over again between UFO manifestations and Bigfoot sightings. And then, of course, there are researchers in the field like Kuwani and Kelly Lapsaritis out in Washington State, who say they've been having ongoing relationships with ETs and Sasquatch about these cross connections and telepathic communication and channeled messages and things like that. We don't really know fully what that connection is, but it's one that needs exploration. And it does no good for researchers just to throw up their hands and say, I don't know, when it comes to that. It's like, well, I don't want to open that door and look in that closet, so I don't know. We have to open that door. We have to look in those closets if we're ever going to try and get to the bottom of what's going on.
Yep, absolutely. Marianne, do you have any questions?
Well, you're definitely into all of the items under this umbrella. I'm just curious, if you were told today that you could only participate in researching and experimenting and writing about one of them, which one would you prefer to study and research mostly?
Well, I would say ufology, and I would pick that from the standpoint of contact with otherworldly beings. I'm not interested in nuts and bolts. I think that's a dead end. But the aspect of ufology that concerns our contact with non-human intelligent beings, it falls under the rubric of ufology, even though it does spill over into these other areas. And I have been very interested in contact experiences of all kinds, positive and negative, and the bulk of them happen in this end of the spectrum. So if I was forced to choose one area, I would choose that, because I think that holds a lot of potential for this groundbreaking that we could do in the field of consciousness, and how we come into contact with non-human intelligent beings and interact with them.
All right. I like that, and the fact that you nicely tie them to other things, so you've been able to identify that it's not going to just be ufology, but you can still tie it to others as well, but with the main focus in ufology. So thank you.
Well, that's where the real frontier in ufology is. And the modern era of ufology started in 1947 with the Kenneth Arnold sightings over Mount Rainier. And even though mystery objects and beings have been part of human history from the get-go, that's our modern age of ufology. And it was completely mired for a long time in this nuts and bolts approach. We have to find and prove that these are craft. These are physical craft, and they have to have certain properties, and there has to be a technology behind them, and who's behind the technology and how are they doing it. And while I'm not saying that we shouldn't be looking in those areas, it's really proven to be quite a dead end, because here we are 60 plus years on. We have no craft. We have no nuts and bolts, but we have an increasing body of evidence of eyewitness personal contact. And there was a major shift in ufology back in the 80s when the abduction scenario started to be given more emphasis. This was originally completely disregarded by the main core of ufology researchers. They weren't interested in talking to crazy eyewitnesses, which is how many eyewitnesses were portrayed. And thanks to some researchers who put this topic on the map, John Mack, Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and Druffel, to name a few, as well as the abductees themselves, more and more attention then was focused on the personal interaction. So it enabled ufology to grow, and it still needs to grow more. We now have, I want to call it a new wrinkle or a new wave of contact experiences with people who feel that they are hybrids, that they are convinced of their what they call their star origins that are intermingled with human origins, and that they have a foot in both camps, and that they have a sole purpose for being here. And more of these individuals now are coming forward with their stories as well. So one of the things is, it doesn't matter whether you look in ufology, the paranormal or the mystical, there's always a fringe component to it that's going to stretch the boggle points. And I just made this point in the introduction to a book that I'm putting out later this summer, that there's always a fringe component that will stretch the boggle points of the outsiders, as well as many people who are insiders. It's always there. And some of the stories seem quite fantastical. I think, yes, we can write some of them off as delusional. people looking for attention. But nonetheless, most of these experiences don't conform to ordinary Earth reality. They're not like daily life. They involve trickster-like things that happen, absurdities that can't be explained by normal rationality. And yet they happen over and over again in this intermingling of our reality with other realities. And we can't, because something seems absurd to us, we can't dismiss it as non-existent. It's like, why are these things taking place? Too many of them have been taking place to dismiss them all as the results of somebody who's not well tethered, as we should say. Sadly, it has been the response of the media and investigators to first put attention on whether or not the eyewitness is sane. And I think that, we should validate the veracity of somebody's claims and determine, what else they've got going on in their lives that could contribute to maybe a projection or confabulation. But we shouldn't automatically assume that eyewitnesses are nutcases, which is what we've done for the past 6 or 7 decades.
And I think that's pretty much the way we have it across a lot of these fields. Individuals who see Bigfoot, who see UFOs, who see ghosts, or other paranormal entities, they are all looked at with that face like, yeah, okay, right, what's wrong with you? What were you drinking? There's a lot of that. And I think that more and more we're seeing that we're not doing that as much, but we still do it as a general rule. So hopefully that does continue to change.
It's and the media is probably more guilty than the rest. That the first take on it is to poke fun. Ha ha! Somebody saw a crazy looking being and it did somersaults and whatever. But you're quite right that it cuts across the board. And when you listen to the accounts of Sasquatch experiencers, dogmen experiencers, even people who've had unusual or particularly terrifying haunting experiences, they have the automatic fear, and rightly so, that if they talk about their experiences, they're going to be looked at as crazy, they're going to be ridiculed, and sadly that happens all too often. Yet we clamor for proof. We as the public, as human beings, we want to know, we want to know what's out there and how we can validate it. And yet when it's served up to us, when evidence is served up to us, we're not willing to look at it. Now, some of that, and Jacques Vallée once observed, and quite rightly so, that there's a comfort zone issue here with people. And most people are very comfortable in their 3D waking life reality. They don't want their worldview shaken up. So the first thing that comes to mind when somebody has an experience that indicates that reality might be something else or have other components to it, it does make people uncomfortable. And so it's easier to laugh it off. And that's, how a lot of people deal with it. Well, let's kind of laugh it off as not real, because if it is real, then I got to really think about this. And so, we can't find too much fault with that response. It's understandable, but it really needs to be balanced now by taking more eyewitnesses seriously from the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, I imagine that you've interviewed plenty of contactees or abductees over the years that you've been in the paranormal field. What is one, that you've spoken with that stands out to you? That one of your more memorable stories that was told to you from a abductee or a witness to a UFO?
One of the cases that comes to mind is a woman in England who really hasn't gone too public with her story, so I won't give her name out, but I started talking to years ago, and her experiences, she had read my work on shadow people. She had shadow people experiences, and they're often a component of alien experiences as well. So she contacted me, and like a lot of people in this field, she'd been a lifelong experiencer of various kinds of phenomena. I find that to be a very strong part of the pattern, that people who have some of the more unusual experiences have a significant life history. It's like they've got some antenna out there that's tuned differently than the rest of us, and they engage in these other realities more easily than we do, and beings who are out there, they see this energy, and they probably target and zero in on these people. But what made her experiences so interesting beyond the repeated visitations was that she was convinced that alien beings are participating in and even determine our reincarnational experiences. And this has surfaced in other abduction accounts as well, that these beings have knowledge of or even participate in human concepts of the afterlife and reincarnation. And for this woman, she had had very vivid experiences of seeing how the aliens selected certain souls to be reincarnated and how they were going to be reincarnated. And this was such a strong component of her experiences that it, for me, it really stands out as a bit different from what I hear from a lot of other abductees. I've talked to abductees who have had both positive and negative experiences, and they both go on. The negative ones have certainly had the spotlight and center stage for some time now, since the 80s. In fact, as attention was focused on abduction, it was all the horrific experiences. And now we're seeing more positive experiences coming forward. So the pendulum can swing either way. And I think it would be valuable to hear more positive experiences. There's a natural tendency for people to report horrific experiences more than positive ones, but we need to hear more about the positive ones, because that's part of the scenarios too. And these individuals maintain that they are changed in positive ways, and their consciousness is transformed in positive ways. They experience an expansion of psychic ability, of healing ability, of self-awareness and connection to the cosmic whole as a result of their contact experiences. And so that's an important balancing out. You know, it's not all just the negative slap you on a table and probe you and do horrible things to you. There are other dimensions to the contact experience as well. And another interesting thing that's surfaced from kind of digressing from the original English case, but that kind of got me going on some of these other research aspects, that global surveys of experiencers have shown that yes, there is this component of the afterlife, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, and reincarnation that has a connection to our contact with non-human intelligent beings. And this is one of the least explored aspects of it. And mainly because it's just now coming to light in any significant statistical research. And that we can't say what the agendas of these beings are, because most of the contactees, they say the aliens don't tell them why they're here or what they're doing. And yet we want to pigeonhole them into they're here to save us, they're here to eat us, destroy us, enslave us, save our bacon, take us away in spaceships after we destroy the planet. You know, any number of scenarios, and nobody really knows what their purpose is. And we also don't know where they're from. because most of them don't identify themselves as to where they come from. When they do, a very small percentage, they say, most of them will say they're from the Pleiades or Orion or Arcturus, Zeta Reticuli. Interestingly, in the early days of ufology, the Space Brother era, our visitors said they were from other planets in our solar system, and now they're from far-flung places, and that could reflect changes in our perspective as well, that beings would not necessarily have to come from Venus or Mars. But most of the time they don't say who they are, where they're from, or why they're here, but they're interacting with us. And people are being changed in various ways permanently, for better or for worse, as a result of having these contact experiences. So we have to throw the ground rules out, because we can't make any assumptions about what's going on. We can't have any preconceived round holes that we want to slam square pegs into about what's going on. We have to be as open-minded and I would say take all things into consideration as we push forward.
So now I know you're a certified hypnotist. Have you ever hypnotized a contactee or an abductee?
I have. I don't do it a lot because it's not my primary occupation. Also, when I've done it, I have to agree that hypnosis is something that has to be done very, very carefully. And the professionals and the experts will tell you that you often don't get to the real material in the first session. It may take multiple sessions. B, this has to be done very carefully so you avoid traumatizing the person. C, a lot of people who have been hypnotizing abductees don't know how to do it properly. They ask leading questions. Mm-hmm. They have assumptions going into it. You can't have any assumptions. And so I think there has been a lot of what I would call unfortunate hypnotism done in the past. And so I've done it with people who and also for past life regression. I've done more past life regression hypnosis than abductee regression. It's from the standpoint of somebody's personal exploration. I'm not doing it with the intent of publicizing the cases, of trying to put something on historical record. I have to go back to Jacques Vallée for a moment here, because he talked about this in the past, that if we are going to hypnotize people, we should do it under rigorous conditions by which hypnosis would be considered admissible in court, and otherwise it's useless. And there are written procedures for hypnosis that is admissible in court, how it is to be conducted, and very few in the UFO field follow those parameters, and so we're left with what kind of evidence are we working from then? And yet we can't ignore the abductee literature where people have undergone hypnosis. There have been, Hynek, when he got cases that Alan Hynek that he thought were worthy of regression, he got professionals from the field of psychology and psychiatry to be involved. And I think at some level, those are the professionals that need to be engaged if you're going to pursue something in depth.
Makes sense. Have you ever had a contactee or abductee describe glowing glitter before they're abducted?
I haven't had any personal cases like that, but I have come across it in the literature. I can't say that it's a common phenomenon, but it has occurred.
Interesting. The reason I ask is I had an experience, over 10 years ago, and I don't talk about it very often, but part of that experience was there was these glittery glowing lights that were coming into the car through the vents, and that was pretty much the last thing I remember until we woke up in the car. We were pulled over onto the side of the road. An hour had gone by. We had no recollection, and that's pretty much the whole story. I mean, it's just before that we saw a giant flash of light, and we were coming back from a concert at the Gorge in George Washington. So this is, a 2-lane highway in the middle of the mountains. There's no street lights. It's super, super dark, very little light contamination. So when this bright light lit up, it lit up the whole area. You just see forever. And I remember it flashing and reflecting off of a tanker truck that was up ahead of us on the side of the highway. And my friend who was driving, I said, both of us were like, holy crap, that wasn't lightning. What was that? So we pull over, and then the next thing I remember is this like gold glittery dust coming into the car. And then then that was it. And then we just kind of both were sitting in the car looking at each other, and we're like, we didn't even really remember pulling over. And I didn't remember the glitter, glowing, flickering business for a few years. All I remembered was that flash. But then later I recollected it came up, and I was like, wait, no, I remember the glittery stuff coming in the car. And then that was it, and so then we're just, all of a sudden we're just sitting in the car and we're looking at each other, and she was like, didn't we leave at midnight? And it was 2:00 in the morning, and we'd only driven 15 minutes, and I was like, yeah, we left at midnight. So and we both just kind of were dead silent the rest of the drive. We didn't really talk about it again for years. And I feel we didn't talk about it because we didn't want it to be real.
And did you pursue any hypnosis for the missing time?
No. I did try hypnosis once. I started having panic attacks while I was driving, and this was recently, about 5 years ago, and it kind of came out of nowhere, these panic attacks I would have. And I tried hypnosis to reduce the panic attacks from driving. And I remember thinking, when the hypnotist was speaking and she was, putting me under, I remember thinking, this isn't working. And the whole time she was talking to me while I was hypnotized, I guess you could say, I was fully conscious. I could hear everything she was saying, but I was bawling. I mean, and it's not like I was crying vocally, but just flooding tears out of my eyes while I sat there relaxed. And I cried the entire time. It was just streaming down. But I wasn't like, there was no vocalization. It was just, flooding tears during the whole session. And then at the end, she said, I'm going to count down and you'll be back or whatever. And she counted, and then I opened my eyes, and I said I was crying the whole time. And she said, yeah, that happens sometimes. Is that common?
Extreme emotional reactions like that, yes. And people, sometimes they don't understand why they're reacting that way. I would say that, gosh, I'm trying to think of any cases that do not have this feature of some sort of manifestation of light prior to the abduction. And I think it comes in different ways for different people. Then sometimes it's a bright light that manifests outside a house, an intense beam of light coming down from above if they're outside. For you, it's glittery light that comes inside a car. It almost doesn't matter what form it takes. What seems to be significant is that there is a manifestation of light prior to the abduction experience. And does that just indicate the presence of some other beings, or is light used in a way to initiate the experience? And could be a bit of both.
Or to initiate the actual abduction, getting you into the craft.
Right, and altering your consciousness in some way. Are they able to use light or perhaps telepathy? Most people say that if they remember communication with otherworldly beings, it is telepathic. They do something to put people into a state of forgetfulness. And what that state is it literally passing out? Is it just going into some altered state where you're not aware of what's going on? We don't really know, but something is done to alter the consciousness of the people who are being abducted, and light may play a role in that.
To make them not remember what occurred once they were aboard the craft.
They may be given some sort of instruction. They could be given telepathic instruction not to remember. And I mean, this is common in stage hypnosis, that you can tell people to remember or not remember something that has been given to them while they're in the state of hypnosis. And it may be, and we have to speculate, it may be the aliens' intentions that we not remember, because that's how they attempt to cover their tracks. And yet, obviously, they know by now that we're onto that, because people have ways of recovering those memories.
Interesting. Marianne?
Now, so also, when traumatic things happen to people, there's a deliberate forgetting as a way of dealing with the trauma. And we find this in cases where people have post-traumatic stress syndrome, is that they have often consciously forgotten entire episodes or certain aspects of traumatic episodes that were just to overwhelm them too much. And so it comes out in like post-traumatic stress symptoms, and they have to deal with it. They also come out in dreams, and for example, there are many cases in the dream literature where people who were subjected to physical or sexual abuse in childhood, quote unquote, forgot those episodes until at some point in adult life, for whatever reason, they started surfacing in dream imagery. And that was a door opener then for the client or the patient then to start coming to terms with some trauma in the past. So we have our own mechanisms for dealing with things that overwhelm us.
And one of them is to just forget.
Just to forget. Now, my personal opinion is that the alien beings who are doing the abducting, and I like to call them aliens rather than ETs because we don't know where they're from, I think that they do something to the abductees to make them forget.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, it's just to cover their tracks, like you said, so that it's a what's the word I'm looking for? Covert operation isolation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Where people aren't telling, oh, this is what happened and this is what they did. And I don't remember being aboard a craft ever. I don't remember seeing any kind of alien. But another interesting part of this story is this was my best friend from high school, and we parted ways, and we didn't talk for, I don't know, 5-7 years, and then we reconnected recently a few years ago, and it turned out we both ended up having to have hysterectomies, and I didn't know she had hers. She didn't know that I had mine, and we both were diagnosed with the same endometriosis, is why we had to have the hysterectomies. But it made me think back to that night, and I thought, that's really, really odd that, her and I were the ones that experienced that, and we parted, 7 years apart, and we end up having hysterectomies.
That is interesting. And who knows, there might be some connect the dot connection there.
Well, and that leads me to my next question, and this is not directed just to UFOs, but in general, do you believe in coincidences?
Well, I would prefer to call it synchronicity or meaningful coincidence. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that things are accidental. And that pertains to just about everything we experience. Everything we experience is the result of some previous action or intention. And therefore, it's not accidental. It's not accidental to meet people, to have an experience, to go someplace. I think there is some purpose behind everything. And of course, not everything is weighted in the ultra important either. There are events and circumstances which are life-changing, and then there are others which are of passing interest.
Right. But ultimately, it's where you're supposed to be. It's not just a coincidence.
Well, exactly, and it's not that destiny is preordained, because I do believe in free will and free choice, but it's a flow of forces in motion. And there's a consequence to forces in motion. They have to go somewhere and result and manifest in something. And so I think that that's part of it. I also think that when we come into life, we have kind of a blueprint mapped out for ourselves, which could be a life purpose or certain souls that we're going to reconnect with, or other things. A blueprint could be quite detailed. And we make choices, and all of our choices lead us to those things or lead us away from those things. And if we have set a certain blueprint for ourselves and we miss an opportunity, I think the forces of the magical universe, and the universe is magical for each and every one of us, rearrange other circumstances for another opportunity, another flyby, so to speak. And I don't think that there's any right or wrong in terms of whether we decide to fulfill certain things that we preconceived, or whether we decide to pass on them, in which case we'll deal with them in some future lifetime. It's just an outflow. It's an outflow of forces in motion. But all of these things add up to meaningful coincidences.
Yep, I agree completely. Marianne, do you have any questions?
Have you had any experiences of your own? You've done a lot of research. You've talked to a lot of individuals, and that who have had them. Have you had any of your own?
I've had lots of experiences, Marianne, and across the board. I have to say that at least at present, I don't seem to have the ET UFO antenna. I've only seen a UFO on a couple of occasions. To my knowledge, I've never been abducted. There's nothing in my life to indicate that. I have had one or two occasions where I've seen beings that you could say might be ETs, but again, we don't know where these beings are from. I've had, on the other hand, I've had an amazing number of encounters with angels. I've had lots of encounters with fairies, ghosts and apparitions, too many to count. Because of my research in shadow people, I've had many encounters with them, and I've certainly encountered demonic entities. I've had one encounter with Bigfoot, and it was not a case of seeing what looked like a physical creature with physical eyes, but feeling a presence, a certain palpable presence, and hearing, the sounds like the wood knocks. And knowing that I was being followed through the woods by something and glimpsing it if I turned around, but I never really got a good look at it. I've never seen dogmen. So I've had lots of experiences, but not uniformly of everything.
Mm-hmm. Are there any things out there in the field that you feel are just a little bit too far-fetched and maybe just not quite possible? Is there anything that you think is well above anything, or are you in the mindset that everything's possible?
Well, I have to say that over the years of my research, my boggle point has gotten stretched further and further out there, and that things that I might have been highly skeptical of several decades ago, I don't have any trouble accommodating now. I don't think we should automatically take things on board. I do have a, pardon my French, bullshit meter that hits the red zone every now and then. But on the other hand, because we're dealing with things from other realities where the ground rules are very different from our reality, we can't afford to just dismiss things out of hand because something seems absurd and irrational to us, or seems to defy what we consider to be the rules of ordinary reality. So let's take Slender Man, for example, or even Black-Eyed Kids, but certainly Slender Man. So the origins of Slender Man seem to be like an internet meme, but then suddenly people are having Slender Man experiences, whether or not they ever knew what the supposed origins of Slender Man were. Slender Man has taken on a life of its own. And this sort of thing has happened before. It's nothing new. For example, at the turn of the 20th century, there was a period of a lot of competition among newspapers for readers. And so they would publish in serial fashion things like adventure stories and paranormal stories, and some of them were just out and out cooked up fiction. In Maryland, for example, there was a monster called the Snallygaster, which was made up out of fiction, and stories were run in a newspaper to attract readers from the competition, the Snallygaster. And it wasn't long before people were reporting sightings of the Snallygaster, not just in Maryland, but in adjacent states. And people were having real encounters with this entity, which continue to this day. We're talking over a century here. And so what's going on? How do these things gain a reality? Or are they conceived of in human consciousness because they are real? And finally, human consciousness latches onto that and projects it outward into a fashion that then can take on its own form, like a thought form or a tulpa, and begin operating on its own. I think that we human beings project a lot of things out into the psycho-spiritual environment that coalesce into something that takes on its own reality and mirrors itself back to us. And here again, we're getting into these frontiers of consciousness where we can't really separate from the egg.
What is one of the ones that you in the past were a little more skeptical of, and that today you're saying, oh, nope, that one, I'm good with that one now?
Well, I would say that, a lot of the UFO contactee accounts, I was struck by the absurd nature of them. And yet the deeper you go into the field, you realize that absurdity is like almost one of the ground rules, if there are any ground rules in the field of these kinds of encounters. So I'm less likely to dismiss those than I might have been in the past. I have... in terms of mysterious creatures, these to me have always been part of the interdimensional reality of Earth. And the fact that they have paraphysical characteristics to them, and they have odd appearances as well, seems to fit the interdimensional aspect to it. But from the beginning of my research, being a Jill of all trades and looking at everything, I've always tried to be open-minded about things. And you do have to look for natural explanations first in a sighting or the manifestation of some kind of phenomena. But if you can reasonably satisfy yourself that no natural explanation is a good fit, then you have to start looking at paranormal explanations. And that's the focus that I've always brought to my research. There are some things that seem to be readily explainable in a natural way. And I think that the whole ghost field has gotten a little carried away with the television shows that over-exaggerate phenomena, and that every haunting is a negative one where people are going to be ripped apart and attacked and driven out of their homes. It's patently ridiculous. These things do happen, but the average haunting is residual, and it's just simply there. And is not some raging entity waiting to, pounce on people. So I think that in the ghost field, we now have people, and all of us in the field, we've experienced the same thing, emails and phone calls from individuals who have recently seen some show and something is going on in their house that they immediately leap to a paranormal factor without considering that there has to be a cause and effect. Something just doesn't start happening out of the blue for no reason. There has to be a cause and effect. And that some strange sound they heard in the house or an odd smell that wafted through a room, it's suddenly an entity, and now they're scared. And a lot of these things do have natural explanations. There are scents that get embedded into an environment over a long period of time. There are natural sounds to a building or a house. And people in certain psychological states can project things into the environment that they then feel is reflected back to them by something external and paranormal. And I think things have gone kind of overboard in the field of paranormal investigation and hauntings.
Well, these days it almost seems like the demons are the new ghosts.
They are. We have a very skittish dance with them because a lot of the researchers who especially deal with the television industry, the people who are on the entertainment end of things seem to wax and wane, hot and cold on demons all the time. Oh, no, don't talk about demons. That's going to scare people. And then, we want demons. And it's back and forth. There is lately a trend toward the demonic, the violent, and Destination America, and I watch these shows too because I want to see what they're doing. It's Destination America is now the paranormal channel, and when you look at all of their shows, the stories are all horrific. Now, there are horrific stories out there, and they can be found, but this misrepresents to the public the notion that if your house is haunted, it's going to be a horror story, and it's just not that way for most cases. We've all been on the boring end of things, where you go into somebody's allegedly haunted house and there's absolutely nothing or very little there beyond the residual, but people have reacted to it in an extreme way. So there are so many factors that have to be taken into consideration, and I've always called human consciousness the wild card. It's the one unknown, because everybody reacts to phenomena in a different way. What's going to be mildly interesting or amusing or fascinating to one person is going to scare the bejeebers out of somebody else. And the way we react to phenomena is going to change the way the phenomena responds to us.
Wow, that's an interesting theory I never thought of.
Well, we can't separate ourselves from it. This is, we're getting back to that thread that we talked about in the beginning of consciousness. What is the role of human consciousness in our unexplained encounters? And it may be something like Mercury that we're never going to be able to pinpoint in any particular way. Mercury it can roll itself up into a ball, but if you try and grab that ball, it's going to squish out in a dozen different directions. And we may be dealing with something like Mercury here, that the closer we look at it and try to grasp it, the more it's going to elude us. But it has to be factored into things, the role of human consciousness in all of these experiences, why they happen in the first place, how they happen, and how they continue to happen based upon the emotional response of the percipient. And emotions are a key component to this. Emotional energy, no matter what spectrum of the field you look at, whether you're looking at communication with the dead, visitations, mysterious creatures, anything, pick one, name anything, emotional response of the percipient is a key part of the experience. And emotions are, in my opinion, emotional energy is the electricity of psi. It has psi has an emotional component to it, and when people engage emotionally in what they are experiencing, that's going to change the very nature of the experience itself, and so it complicates the picture considerably. We human beings, we want things black and white. We want an explanation. We want something with boundaries. We want a pie chart. And all of these things resist that kind of categorization, that kind of thinking. It's 3D thinking versus extra-dimensional thinking. And this is the direction we're going to have to go in if we're going to fully understand any of this. I call this transdimensional Earth. This is a concept I've been talking about for years now. And I think we're already into the early stages of transdimensional Earth. Transdimensional Earth is an expansion of human consciousness to incorporate more otherworldly and alternate reality experiences, and not just as an aberration, as something to be weird and frightened of, but as something that we can engage with willfully, on demand rather than as a victim, and experience some of these things on a different level of understanding. I think this is the natural evolutionary path of human beings. I'm certainly not the first person to say it. All the mystics throughout history have predicted an evolution like this, a transcendence of human consciousness that's going to change us physically as well as spiritually and emotionally. And I do think that this is the drift that we're going in, and that where we are now with global media and the internet connecting us, we have global mind now. Whether we like it or not, we are in global mind, and we have the capability of interacting instantly to anything around the planet. So this creates thought forms. And if you engage enough of the planet in powerful thought forms, unified prayer day, unified meditation day, get mad at this country because they're a perpetrator, let's gang up on them and make war, that's going to have a powerful effect on the outflow in physical reality. Now, from the paranormal perspective, just that aspect alone, the more we report our experiences and examine them, the more the media portrays them, the more we openly discuss them. This in turn invites more experiences. The more experiences we're going to have, that's the natural outcome of this, because we focused our thoughts in those directions. Collectively, we have focused our thoughts in the directions of having contact with otherworldly realities, whether we anticipate that it's going to be scary or it's going to be good. And this catapults us into the growth of a transcendental kind of consciousness, where we then start encountering more people start encountering these things more frequently. I believe this is already happening. It's been happening, but now it's happening at a faster and faster rate, maybe even an exponential rate because of global mind. Now, this change in consciousness has to change physical reality. You cannot come into increasing contact with alternate realities and have 3D physical reality remain the same. And so what is the future of the Earth? What is our reality going to be in the future? Those of us who are alive today, unless we're very, very young, may not see much of that reality, but it's happening. And how are we directing this? Are we going to direct it with fear, or are we going to direct it with a positive outlook? And I do believe, and pardon my sermon here, I know I'm going on a bit, I do believe that there are forces on the planet that want to manipulate this collective energy. This is a very powerful thought form that could manifest. And so are we going to be afraid, or are we going to protect our sovereignty, our free will, and right to self-determination, and go at this in a positive fashion? Well, you can just look at the internet today and see how fear-driven it is. And fear drives people in a certain emotional direction. It's an adrenaline, protect yourself, fight or flight mode, and it keeps people very vulnerable and in a very weak position. I think that there are alien beings participating in this along with human beings, and so we need to become more aware of how we are directing our thoughts, where we are putting our intention and our consciousness, and how we are being affected emotionally by the things happening around us. So I think I'll get off my soapbox.
Oh, no, what you're saying is fantastic. I mean, I'm speechless. I don't even know what to say. You're blowing my mind, and I fully agree with you. I can see what you're saying, and I can see how it's playing out. And it's unfortunate that the majority of society doesn't get that.
Well, they don't. And when you look at it on the surface, just look at human history. The average person is concerned about survival and about being happy and healthy and having things and being safe. And in earlier times, that consumed most of people's energy. And today we have a little more free time. But still, those are the basic physical driven needs of humanity. And so once we have our safety, our security, our stuff, our defined world, then, we don't want the boat rocked. But it is being rocked now, and we have to realize that and decide how we're going to respond to it. Unfortunately, we now have people literally surgically tied practically to their cell phones. And hey, I'm not going to say I don't want a cell phone. They are the primary means of communication today. How we get our information, how we stay connected to people. But anybody who's walked down a street, we all see people who are so tied to their cell phone and looking down at their screen that they are completely oblivious to the world around them. People will sit at restaurants and text each other instead of talking to each other. And so this technology, which is so miraculous, has a very dark, I want to say even a demonic side to it. It's enslaving as well as liberating. And if you look on the surface of things, right now we are enslaved. We are enslaved to this technology. We have to be distracted all the time. We can't stand 10 seconds without reaching for our cell phone to find out what's going on out there and who's texting who and what's the latest on the HuffPost. And while it's good that we have so much available to us anytime we want to look for it, and I, as a researcher, make heavy use of that myself, we're allowing it to run our lives. And if we are being manipulated in any way emotionally, it's going to be through mass technology, through global mind, to put out whether it's false news or to hype up certain things that happen. Masses of people are going to be swayed emotionally because we're literally tied to these devices to the point where we can't even connect with human beings in a normal fashion anymore. That's isolating. It connects us through technology, but it isolates us in a very important spiritual way. And I think we really need to be aware of this and to guard against it. There has to be a way to use the positive aspect of this technology without allowing the dark side of it to start pushing us in directions that we're going to be collectively sorry for in the future.
You just blew my mind again. You just blew my mind again. Oh my gosh, that is so true. I mean, I'm guilty of it. If I'm just going to the gas station and I forget my cell phone, I'm in a panic. I don't have my cell phone.
I'm the same way. I mean, I walk from room to room in the house with the cell phone just in case somebody calls, and I don't want to miss their call. But yeah, I'm the same way. Reach for the cell phone. And it is a way to, it's a marvelous way to stay up to date in so many ways. I mean, the wonders of the internet and social media, it's fantastic. But, like I said, there's a dark underbelly to it, and we need to be aware of that and not allow ourselves to be manipulated. And if there is an element on this planet that wishes to enslave humanity, how would they do it? They would do it through global mind, through global media. For the first time in the history of human beings, millions, billions of souls can be swayed by something that goes around the internet. At no other time in history could any such collective thought form ever take place. It's staggering.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about entities that may be behind the dark underbelly of the internet and the global mind. Are you referring to demons?
No, I'm referring to what we would call ETs, or non-human intelligent beings. I think the dark forces of spirit operate in entirely different ways. But I think that the non-human intelligent beings who have been visiting Earth and who even have established a presence on Earth, I don't think there's any single agenda going on. I think that there are, just like human beings, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, the indifferent. I think that there are alien beings who are benevolently inclined, and others that are hostile to human beings and have aligned themselves with some of the darker human forces on the planet to steer things in certain directions. And this would not bode well for any of us on the planet. Demonic forces, the forces of spirit, I think operate in a much different way. Certainly all dark forces prey upon the vulnerabilities and weaknesses of people, and they seize those weaknesses and magnify them to manipulate. And I don't think that demons are going to make us do anything that we might not otherwise be inclined to do, but they're certainly going to seize on our vulnerabilities and magnify them, and that's how they get at people. They get at people through anger, resentment, greed for power, greed for money, those kinds of what you would call the vices. That's how they operate. And I don't see. I think the real, if you had to say, well, what's the more dangerous enemy facing human beings? Is it the quote unquote the forces of Satan, or is it hostile aliens? I'm going to put my money down on hostile aliens any day, which is not to minimize the presence of the demonic. As a paranormal investigator, I've certainly run into it a lot, and dark entities like the shadow people and the jinn that. They prey upon vulnerable human beings and their own ability to sap the life force out of people and to bring about destruction in various ways. But it's different from what's going on with the hostile alien forces.
I've thought about the future.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that, I've thought about what would happen if there was an EMP pulse, or somehow our entire country lost power, right? People are so reliant on technology these days. It would just be total chaos. If we went a week without power, without the internet, without being able to contact people, the stores can't operate when the power goes out because they don't know how to do the math in their head. They can't, you know what I mean? Like they need that bar scan to scan it out of their inventory, and if the power goes out, they can't operate.
Well, it would be more than that. First of all, we would have a total collapse of society, total collapse. And in the aftermath of that, we would have Mad Max. That's where we would be. We would be in Mad Max territory.
And I also think, about the youth today. Back when I was a kid, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have cell phones. To do research, you'd have to go to the library and actually read a real book, right? And the youth today that's going to be, taking over the country in 20 years, it frightens me because they're so reliant on technology that they don't have the resources that we older people have from living in a time without all of this technology. And if it were to somehow go away, I don't know what they would do. they wouldn't know what to do.
It is rather frightening that. Of course, I think it's natural that older generations look upon younger generations and think the world is headed toward calamity. But here again, we're in a much different situation than humanity has ever been in, and I think the stakes are bigger and the implications are bigger. And what we see in the younger generation, people that we call the millennials, is a very big disconnect from the past of humanity. A lot of them don't even know what happened. They have very little sense of history, important people from history. And why should they? Why should they learn it when, if they want to know something, all they have to do is get their cell phone out? So you can understand where that mindset is coming from. It's like, I don't need to know all that. If for some reason I need to know it, I'll just look it up. But knowledge of these things plays in the backdrop of who we are as people and who we are collectively as a nation, as a race, as the collective of humanity. Our connection to the past is part of who we are. And if we have a big disconnect from our past, that to me sets up a vacuum which would enable hostile forces to operate with impunity. And that could be a very big dark side, downside to this emerging picture. Already we have schools that are not teaching cursive writing anymore. Yep. Cursive writing is going to go the way of the hieroglyphs. And pretty soon our communication is going to be in emojicons. And we're back to hieroglyphics, in a way. So you can't stop it. The thing is, you can see this happening, but nobody can stop it. It's a juggernaut. It's a collective juggernaut that had its roots who knows when. And these are forces in motion that are too powerful to deflect, and where they're going to go. I think we still have the ability to determine where they're going to go, but we have to know about it in order to do something about it. And it's the lack of awareness that I find very disturbing.
Right.
Yeah, I work with high school children. By day, I'm a high school teacher, and it's exactly that. They have no concept at all of anyone throughout history. If it's not happening, on their phone, they know nothing about it. They don't pay attention to what's going on in the world around them right now. If it's not something that's in their own little world, in their little connected friendships, it doesn't have true meaning to them. And as a researcher, I go to libraries and I, ask for information about certain things, or where can I find this book or whatever. And the librarians look at me and they're like, well, did you Google it? Well, wait a minute. I came to the library to have a physical. What do you mean, did I Google it? I went to the Library of Congress and I wanted to see a book, and they're like, well, we have that online. You could just look at it online. Well, I don't want to look at it online. I want to look at the real book. Come on. So that's even hard for me as a researcher as well, is if it's not online, they don't really want to take the time to let you examine it.
It's there's just some, to me, as a researcher and someone who has been a reader and explorer my whole life, these are disturbing trends. And the disconnect, we're connected, but we're disconnected. And you made such a good point about, if it isn't happening in my own little sphere, then I don't care about it. And yet we're connected globally and manipulated and swayed globally. We react to things globally, and yet all we care about is what's in our own little sphere. And I think the consequences of this, if things continue in that direction, it's not going to be good for humanity as a whole. And where that's going to lead, it certainly makes us ripe for invasion, for manipulation, for enslavement, and any number of things. I've often thought that humanity is some sort of genetic experiment anyway, and when you consider the fact that in the course of our very brief history on this planet, we've never really gotten past aggression and warmongering, kind of makes me wonder what if whoever put all this genetic mix together, what they're doing with it. But we posit that there must be happier places out there. We perceive as heaven as a place free of conflict and trouble and unhappiness, and we think that there must be alien races out there who are advanced beyond the need for war. Well, why are we so mired in it? Why do we repeat over and over again the cycle of war and aggression and violence against each other? No other species on this planet acts out aggressively against another unless it's in need, some sort of survival need. And we do it all the time for other purposes, for money, power, acquisition.
Sometimes just for the hell of it.
And sometimes just for the hell of it.
Yeah. Oh, scary times. So let's try and end this on a happier note, since we went way down the dark rabbit hole. You have mentioned that you had some interactions with angels.
Yes, from childhood. And, when you're a kid, you think everybody has the same experiences, and you get older and you find out they don't. It's a very uneven playing field when it comes to interaction with alternate realities. But I've always had a very strong connection to the angel realm, and I've done 7 books on angels. I consider them to be our best spiritual allies. They're not going to pull our chestnuts out of the fire for us, but they are able to help us call upon our greatest strengths and abilities to manifest our destinies, to overcome obstacles, and to, if you want to get really spiritual about it, to prevail in the right. In the high road, in the highest possible virtues that human beings can embody and manifest. And I think it's important to have a relationship with angels. They've been kind of cutesified in recent decades. Oh, and by the way, we were talking about reluctance to talk about experiences. When I was researching my first angel books, I was interested to discover in earlier literature that even up to about the mid-20th century, people, if they had an angel experience, they were afraid to talk about it, because why would mighty angels be coming to visit them? And other people would think that they were crazy or on some sort of an ego trip. And, we don't think that way today, fortunately. But it affected that reluctance to talk about experience for fear of ridicule, certainly held in that regard as well. So angels are spiritual forces. I believe they're spiritual beings. They are shapeshifters. They can take the form of people, and the mysterious stranger is one of their common manifestations when they have need for that role. But they are spiritual forces that have their overarching purpose deals with the whole of creation and the maintenance of balance and harmony in that. And I think that's what angels look after.
It's good to know that they're out there, and I think all of us probably should, talk to our angels or the angels. I don't know if we get assigned angels or if there's, out there for everybody, but I've definitely, on a time or two, St. Michael, can you help me through this? I'm having a hard time here. And it does seem to work. I don't know if it's actually Saint Michael that's helping me through the situation that I'm needing the help through. But I have on previous occasions asked for his help and was immediately felt calmer and more in control of the situation than I was before I asked for the help.
Yes, and you could even say that angels are in part an aspect of our higher selves. We're all interconnected, and I think we angels are deeply connected to human beings. I think they mirror back to us an ideal. It's the ideal of our potential and the ability to manifest things to their highest and holiest degree possible. They're a mirror, and they reflect that back to us. And we can call upon that and even strive for that in our own development. And I like your comment about ending on a positive note, and certainly that's a positive thing to be aware of is angels. And people have varying degrees of connections with angels, but it's very easy to make the connection through meditation. I think daily meditation is important. But even the other things we were talking about that have, this dark underbelly, as we also discussed, they have tremendous potential for good and for the manifestation of wonderful things. And so awareness, what we need is awareness about the whole picture of what's going on so that we can make the most informed decisions and choices for ourselves. And in so choosing for ourselves, we affect the whole as well, and we participate in the whole on a higher spiritual vibratory level. So that's one of the things that I wish to bring out more in my work, and that's the direction that a lot of my work is going in. And it gets back to Marianne's original question, like, well, if you only could pick one field, what would it be in? And so it's the field that has to do with this frontier of human consciousness and how we are using our consciousness to propel ourselves forward as individual souls and also as humanity, as a collective.
Well, it's beautifully said. Do you have any other questions, Marianne?
I was trying to think of, is there any field under the realm that you think that women are either over or underrepresented, since we're the women's show?
Well, women are underrepresented almost everywhere.
Amen.
I do a lot in the metaphysical fields as well, and you certainly see more women there who work as psychics and mediums and spiritual healers and counselors. I think the field is a little better balanced there, but ufology, cryptozoology, the paranormal, they're still a boys' club, and there are plenty of women in those fields, and many of whom are doing and have been doing outstanding work, but of course they're still not on an equal par with guys.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree with you there completely, because you go to any paranormal event, a psychic fair, whatever, and the psychics tend to be, I've only actually at psychic fairs only ever seen one male psychic. Everybody else has always been a female, and a lot of the individuals who have the paranormal ghost hunting type groups and metaphysical, they tend to be still a lot more with the males who are the leads in those areas.
Well, you can extrapolate that out to the world in general. Who are the big authority figures? It's it's the man, and women have made inroads in certain societies. In many societies, they're not. They're still very much second-class citizens. But I happen to like my role as a woman. obviously like being a woman, and I think women certainly have they have a different way of looking at things just naturally, because women are more emotional than men. We're more in tune with our emotions. We have a different way of reacting to things, and because women are the vessels of life, I think that gives them a different perspective as well in terms of what are the important things going on here, and both viewpoints are needed. Obviously, we live in a universe of polarities of light and dark, male and female, good and bad, etc. We need the masculine and the feminine, but it's been greatly out of balance, for most of our history, that men have held most of the playing cards and women have not, and some of that's just been by biological fact, that women are the ones who bring children into the world and are the major caretakers of home and family, while men are out doing and building and creating and fighting against each other. And thanks to modern technology, more women now are able to participate in the power structures, in the power world. And so I think it's important for women to make their contributions. And I think they speak for themselves in terms of their importance. And I'm glad to see a lot of women up on the podium, on the stage. In the early part of my career, there weren't very many. And now there are a lot, and I see a lot of women doing really fine work, and so it's progress, definitely progress.
As far as individuals who have experiences, do you see more women willing to express that they've had experiences as compared to men? And or do you think that it's just that women have more experiences or men have more experiences based on their consciousness and their normal roles?
I would say, and this is based on various surveys that have been done in different kinds of experiences. They're really equal between men and women. Men have are just as likely to have experiences as women. Women may be more likely to speak out about them than men, but I think that it's really hard to say that that's a hard and fast rule, because we have so many experiences from men on record. Women are going to react differently to experiences than men, simply because we're more emotionally open than most men are. But the experiences themselves, I think, are pretty uniform between men and women.
And do you think that there's a type of person that would have more experiences than others?
Well, it's that person that I said toward the beginning of the show has the antenna out there. There are people who are born with something in their field of consciousness that lights up to these alternate realities and spirit worlds. And if anybody's going to have an experience, it's going to be more likely them. And it usually starts very early in life. Everybody early in life has some kind of experience. But there are some people that seem to be hardwired to have more experiences than the average person. And for some people, it's skewed in certain directions. They may not ever have very many ghost experiences, but they're going to be seeing UFOs all the time. Or people have angel experiences, and they're never going to experience UFOs or cryptids. It's not uniform across the playing field.
So you think that we're born tuned into one way or the other, for the most part?
Well, I think that we have natural inclinations. Now you can expand, anybody can expand their psychic ability to perceive, have a better perception of alternate realities. And some of us are going to go through life playing chopsticks, and some of us are going to be Beethovens and Mozarts. it just varies significantly by individual, and who can say the reason why? If you look at family histories, a lot of these people have can cite generations of individuals, family relatives who've been similarly open, and so there may be something genetic going on.
Interesting.
I was going to ask. Yeah, very interesting. And I was going to ask if you had noticed a pattern with, contactees, abductees, people that have witnessed apparitions, if you've noticed any genetic trait that they all share, such say maybe blood type.
The whole bit about blood type is, I think, way up in the air. The studies that purported to show that negative RH negative or blood type B, they were very limited studies, and larger studies, it's too iffy. I don't know what it is. When I say genetic, it's because there seems to be a family lineage of certain abilities, or maybe inclinations or likelihood of certain kinds of experiences. Is that passed literally through DNA, or is it some sort of consciousness thing? We don't know. We just simply don't know. But I'd say the jury is out on blood type. Excellent.
We're running out of time. Do you have any events coming up or any books coming out that you would like to promote?
Well, I have a number of books because, as I mentioned, I'm kind of on a rocket burn. I have been my whole life. But my Guide to Psychic Protection is just out in ebook and will be out in hard print in about a week. I have some anthologies coming out. I have a UFO anthology coming out in July or August, and an anthology on mysteries of the afterlife coming out at about the same time frame. I also publish other people's books as well. Got a very busy calendar this summer, starting with the Pine Bush UFO event in New York on the third weekend of May. I do Troy Taylor's Haunted America conference in June. Hex Fest in New Orleans in August, the Michigan Paracon in August, big afterlife convention in Scottsdale, Arizona in September. And then, of course, once we hit Halloween time, well, you know where I'll be. I'll be in Salem, Massachusetts.
That's probably the best place to be for Halloween.
Yeah, it's kind of ground zero, isn't it?
That's one place it's on my bucket list. I haven't been there yet, but I really want to go.
Well, I would like to mention my websites also in closing. My personal website is visionaryliving.com, and my publishing website is visionarylivingpublishing.com.
And you mentioned that you publish other people's works. For someone an aspiring author who has a rough draft, do you take submissions?
I do take submissions, and on visionarylivingpublishing.com, on the fact sheet, I talk about the kind of books that I'm looking for and how to query me for a submission. Excellent.
Rosemary, you are the guest of a lifetime. I could talk to you for hours and hours on end. We would love to have you back on.
Well, I'd love to be back on, Marie. We've had a very stimulating discussion, and I think a very illuminating one. And I hope people enjoy it.
Me too. And you really just knocked this out of the park. You blew my mind 3 times in a row, and that's really hard to do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I like blowing minds.
Thank you so much for coming on and being on the show with Marianne and I. And everyone, thank you for tuning in. Our guest next month will be Karen Dahlman. She is a spiritual advisor, Ouija board expert, And so you want to keep your eyes peeled for information coming up on our next show. And until the next episode, stay scared.
Oh, just some scary movie. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters.